So we get to the next part of the day. It's always a bit unfortunate to speak right after lunch because everyone is a bit tired. And I will talk about law, so it will be more boring, but I will try to make it as interesting as I can. And yeah, we're going to introduce our paper that we published last year at ERCIM workshop on blockchain in Amsterdam. And it represents also our two perspectives. Normally we present it together, and we also did in Amsterdam, but this time we said, okay, we will both show our perspective on it from the legal and from the technical side, and go a little bit more into depth. What's the background behind the paper, because the paper itself is just a few pages long. So we want to go a little bit more into our perspective. So I start, maybe some of you ask you, what are all these lawyers? Why should I even talk to them? Like someone who solves a problem you didn't know you had in a way you don't understand. Also this way, technical and legal experts have something in common. I would say, because also I don't know how you guys solve your problems. And yeah, if I might be pretentious, I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right. That's something very typical about lawyers. They believe in objective truth and the right argument. So I will show you also that. Maybe Chris, you can help me about this thing.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to start with this bit looking back in legal history. This is Frederick the Great. He was the King of Prussia. And he was, maybe if whoever has been to Sanssouci, he was the guy building this castle. And he was very oriented to France and the French state of art, of governance. And he was dreaming of the perfect law book. He said, okay, if we have good provisions, which are very precise, we don't need any judges to solve our problems, because the law itself is so clear that, you know, get rid of all the judges, the bureaucrats, we don't need them anymore. We have such a great law. This was his dream. Well, it didn't work out. We still have courts and we still have a lot of bureaucracy. But we have a similar thought in the blockchain sphere of, we could call him Vitalik the Great, who's dreaming of a computer system without any third-party interference. And we had the DAO, which thought was born from immutable, unstoppable, and irrefutable computer code. Well, yes, but that's what I thought when I first heard that about the DAO, to say, okay, you want to program something, you want to make a framework that is so clear that nobody should ever have anything to change, and it's you want to regulate a complex system where you solve all the upcoming problems up front. That's what Frederick the Great thought is possible, and that's what some of the people, I'm not generalizing this, but think, you know, if we just make the right computer programs, we can solve all problems and we don't need any corrupt human beings in the equation. I would say, well, looking on the legal history, we could not get rid of human beings by making good laws, and I think we also cannot do it by computer code, so we always have to keep the human in the loop. So just as a background, you know, what the law is doing. This is the German civil code. It's called BGB, Bürgerliches Gesetzbuch. And this is 4 books just commenting the provisions. So all the knowledge that somehow science and courts and so on know about the German civil code is inside these books. And as you can see, there's 2,385 paragraphs. And this is highly abstract stuff, so they don't write. So this is just what the law is, and this is all about all contracts, about family law, about legacy law. It's all inside of this. So I want to get a bit more what's actually the difference between law and computer code, or like computer science. What does blockchain mean in this context? So I chose some articles just to show also the dreams of the people from the blockchain community. Some of them is the dream to make bureaucracy and regulation utterly redundant. So there's people who think, okay, if we make good blockchain technology, we can get rid of the law or replace it. And also BitNation's founder hopes that BitNation could one day replace the nation state and rid us of bureaucrats. Instead, we should have a world of million competing digital nations. So this is ultimate Darwinism, you could say. Just everyone is competing about everything. We only have game theory in the way to structure our society. And we don't need any bureaucracy. So this is on the one side, with a legitimate criticism on the legal system and the bureaucratic system and the public administration, but also thinking further than that and some utopian thinking about it. So just as a difference, and I just... Sorry?
Doesn't work.
Okay. So just as a difference, and one of the things that I would say for programming, for me it looks like this. This is somehow computer code and there's Ethereum. But in government or in our democratic state, we have like division of powers. So it's not just one person who's programming, executing, and interpreting the code. This is happening in computer code. It's one entity. Here we have like a separation of powers. Just kind of how the two spheres work different. Just to make it a little bit more clear, how computer code and law work different, I want to show you, like ask all the techie people around you, how would you maybe program this in a source contract, a reasonable time limit? These are all expressions from the law. You see a reasonable time limit, is it 1 day, 2 days, 5 days? Without undue delay, this is a legal term, how would you program that? Or serious disadvantages of the common good, how would you approach that, writing a software to find out what that is, or good faith, legitimate interest. So I took this from a good paper that I found quite useful, and it says legal rules are always written in a natural language, and it's inherently ambiguous, like common good, legitimate interest. You always have room for interpretation, whereas formal algorithms are using mathematical models, and thus are always more specific because they give a certain answer, but they're less flexible. And that's actually the answer of the law to Frederick the Great and his dreams, was to say, okay, we need interpretation inside our legal terms, because otherwise we cannot cover this variety of cases that come up in practical life. While computer code always tries to get a certain input into a certain output. And according to these people, Primavera de Filippi and Samer Hassan, we see in blockchain technology that we rely more on code to regulate individual actions, and that there is a new type of regulation maybe that we have to think about. We have to maybe somehow think, how can we transfer the legal concepts into computer code? And maybe we need a different conception of the law. This was kind of the starting point for our research, to think how can we actually do that through blockchain technology? How can we bring the law and the technical sphere somehow together? Like maybe all of you have heard code is law, this by this famous quote. But we see they're still somehow different, and we have to see that. So I give you this quote also. It's interesting about bureaucracy. My background is more constitutional law and public administration. So this quote is, I will just read it for all the people also on the stream who maybe don't see it. Once fully established, bureaucracy is among those social structures which are the hardest to destroy. As an instrument of rationally organizing authority relations, bureaucracy was and is a power instrument of the first order for one who controls the bureaucratic apparatus. Where administration has been completely bureaucratized, the resulting system of domination is practically indestructible. And who said this? This was Max Weber, who lived until 1920. It's a famous sociologist. And he already saw that bureaucracy, and blockchain is criticizing bureaucracy just for those things, like from the community, which I showed before, from BitNation and so on. And this is from Anish from Stanford University, saying we need to know considerably more about the factors that explain the ecology of code-based governance structures. So this is something for me coming from constitutional law and administrative law. There is a very complex and very, say, sophisticated system of how we organize our societies nowadays, socially, through bureaucracy, through public administration. And we cannot be that naive to just say, okay, let's just switch all of that to code. Because it's structured different, and we want to solve very complex systems. So we have to see, what does governance mean? And what does it mean in a code-based regulation? This is just the beginning of research, so there is a lot of things coming up. But this is more from the, let's say, public administration side. And I want to show a little bit how governance is different. So, like now we say to the worker, we say, okay, perform this task, and he can do it however he wants. Or let's put a different example. If I don't want to buckle up in my car, in the analog world, I can do that, but if a policeman catches me, I get a fine. In the digital world, I just cannot drive without buckling up. So it's a different form of more intermediate domination and power that we have to consider if we think about turning governance structures into code. Because then the alternative action is not possible. It's just not possible to do that. This is from that paper. I maybe don't go too much into detail here. So long story short, this is also from our paper, one of our previous paper. We're trying to find a common language between law and computer science. And should they succeed in harmoniously tuning themselves in times of digitalization, it would be music in the ears of social progress. So that's our utopia, our dream, and our focus of the research, basically. Finding this common language and shaping the future in dialogue between the two spheres. So any questions until this point? Because now it will get more legal. I will build on things that already Oliver has said. Some things will be repetitive, but I think for many of you who have not known about data protection law, maybe this, hearing it the second time makes it easier to remember some of it in the future. But I will go a little bit more detail and try to focus on that. So GDPR, very much discussed. From my point of view, it's a good chance for Europe to go to use privacy and implement it in digital technologies, and thus go this like famous third way of Europe, not giving it to the free market forces like in the US, not controlling it by state actors like in China, but putting the citizen in the center of all our approaches. So just for all the techies among you, this is how a law looks like. So it's just some plain text, like someone told me, I think you left said I was thinking to also study law, but it was so much text, so much plain text, I couldn't take that. So I studied math. So just to give you some ideas, so there's some terms here, and always think, it's more ambiguous and you have to interpret more in law than in computer science. So we have the data subject who can give consent. About personal data, there can be a legal obligation also. So it's not all the consent, maybe that's interesting. Well, we talked also before a lot about consent, but giving consent is only one legal way to process data. Also, if there is a law saying you can process data, also then the data controller is allowed to do it. So we don't only need consent, we also need maybe smart contracts who can somehow find out if there's a legal obligation. And then we have the controller. So these are just some legal terms, basically. And I will go into that. Like the big question also before was, what's personal data and what does it mean? Oliver has given a lot of input, so I will keep it short. Just remember the question, personal data exists when you can identify a natural person with this data set, directly or indirectly, so it's very wide. And usually through an identifier, and if we work with cryptography in blockchain, usually the identifier would be the public key address. And the question would be, can I identify someone through that? If yes, it's personal information. If no, it's not. Also, like we had before, there's also anonymous, pseudonymous, and personal information. And pseudonymization is only one stronger protected form of personal data. So if we have a pseudonymized data, we still have we still can identify natural person. If it even can be only you can identify the data through your key, then it's already not anonymous. Anonymous means nobody can identify a person. Only if we have anonymous information, we're out of that. So, does a blockchain carry personal data? Well, a typical lawyer answer is always it depends, and it really does how you build your system. This is also, we'll come to our standardization project. One of the key things that we want to do there is to find out how can we make it harder to identify a person. And how can we make it almost impossible to identify a person? And how can we use technical and organizational means to do that? So this would be like the, again, lawyers so interpretable answer, but the more difficult an IT system renders the option to identify a person behind blockchain data, and the closer it comes to anonymity, the more compliant it is to the virtues of the GDPR. So we should, in my opinion, we should not try to make anonymous data on blockchain. We should just try to protect the personal data as much as we can. And also, I think if you think in big scenarios with chain analysis and very much context with IP addresses, still we have that nowadays. We still have maybe marketplaces and cryptocurrencies. All there is traces that can lead back to us. So I think a truly anonymous system anonymous in the legal system is not really what we're looking for. Rather a well-protected system. Also, we had the question, who's the controller of blockchain? I just want to give you the provisions also that you also see a bit how the law works, also to give you just an idea. So we have these provisions in Article 4 of the GDPR, you have many definitions. So the controller is the natural or legal person which alone or jointly with others determines the purposes and means of the processing of personal data. So the legal thing is who determines the purpose and means of the processing. So who, I can say, who controls it. Exactly. Then we have Article 26, that's maybe going a little bit further. We don't only have a single controller, we also have joint controllers, so more people can share the responsibilities. And that's actually new under the GDPR. And I think that this can fit for blockchain scenarios, but the problem here is that we need an arrangement between the joint controllers. And in my opinion, it's also a bit contested in science and between legal scholars is, do we need an arrangement to have the joint controllers, or are the joint controllers obliged to have an arrangement? Meaning is, if we don't have an arrangement, we also don't have joint controllers, or do we have joint controllers and then they have to make an arrangement? And I think the second is the more appropriate one, but the problem is if you don't have this arrangement, you already you act not according to the law, and you can get fines. So the question here would be, how can we make these arrangements? How can we translate this arrangement maybe in a code-based language and into an infrastructure that acts like an arrangement in the law? So this would be one open question that has to be looked into in more detail. So according to that, maybe we could just, what do you think, guys, is like, who's the controller? Is it maybe, do you think it's the programmers, like Satoshi? Is it the miners, the nodes, or all of them together? And is there a difference between permission and permissionless blockchains, in your opinion? Like, anyone like to comment on that, or give your opinion? We had it a little bit before with Oliver, also gave some arguments. It's no wrong answer because all of these are around there, like some scholars say like that, say like that.
Yeah. Depends on the consensus mechanism of the blockchain. Also the proof of work algorithm would give the power to the miners to decide into their consensus or something. And there are some other models. Proof of stake, proof of stake.
So you'd say, like in a proof of work on scenario, it could be the miners who determine the purposes and means of the processing of personal data.
I mean, they are the one who decide at the end which transaction is right or not right.
Yeah.
and which should include you.
Yeah, it's also, some say that, like the counter argument to that is usually that people say, okay, the miners are not really determining the processing of personal data, they're just doing the computation to find a new block, so they don't really work with the personal data or the potentially personal data, which is their identifier, which is the public key. So some people say, okay, the miners shouldn't be it because they actually don't process the personal data, because they just find a new block. Also, some of the programmers, this would be unfair because usually in law it's the person who applies something or brings it to the market or connects it to the sphere of natural persons is to blame, let's say. So many things say that maybe it's really the nodes because you are kind of feed in your information. But in this way, it's kind of a bit absurd because the controller, in the traditional sense of the law, is like one entity that you can go to and make liable for breaches. And if every node is controller, then what's the point? Who do you actually sue in the case if you find any problems?
In the case, miners are running full nodes.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is also, if I remember correctly, Jörn Erdgut had once the opinion that actually the data subject himself is the controller. In a way, can you elaborate a little on that view?
Yeah, it's in the end, you could say the person who actually puts the data in is the one who controls, it's the only grasp of the person that determines the purposes and means of the processing. This way, it would somehow just ruin, like from a legal point, it kind of ruins all your terminology because you say the data subjects and the controller are two different people normally. Now they're the same, so kind of the whole concept and kind of breaks apart. So I personally would say that all nodes jointly can be joint controllers, but still then we have the problem that they need an arrangement to be compliant. Which you can do, I think, in permission scenarios. That's even easier because you could say the person who gives out the keys is maybe controller. Or you could also, there it would be easy because you have like consortium members and they could actually make arrangements because all actors know each other. But the more unknown the people become, the more harder it becomes to kind of make one person liable. So we'd say, okay, the permission blockchain is maybe the entity who manages the key infrastructure, or the consortium altogether as joint controllers. Permissionless blockchains, maybe every individual node, or we could even say every data subject himself. This is kind of open question. But this is kind of where I just want you today to understand like where the problems are coming from, so that the lawyers are not just making something up or like I just want to hinder progress, but they just really have their own logic, and that's where it comes from. Well, then the next questions would be, if you make every node responsible, how can they fulfill their obligations, like right to be forgotten or right to information and so on? Just want to go again about these joint controllers, because it's actually an interesting way how we can do that. Maybe we can go into the discussion for that. So just, why do we need controllers? What's the role of the controller? Is one, that you can be held liable for damage. So if you have joint controllers, you can just say, okay, I choose you, and you give me all the damage, and it's your business to get it back from all the other joint controllers. So if we would make one node responsible, you could just pick any node and say, you pay me for my whole damage. Exactly. And this is the second one, Article 26, it would be that if you want to, say, have some data deleted, you could just pick any of the node and say, you delete it, but technically it's not possible that one node deletes everything, so it's kind of, you see, it doesn't really fit. And the reason is, the joint controller, that you should not have any disadvantages by people sharing responsibilities, because it's like from the data subject's view. And it's also kind of what's behind Bitcoin in my perspective, is a bit to kind of make it a way that there is no real responsibility. You cannot grasp anyone. That's the great idea behind blockchain, but somehow the problem from the legal side. because you want give the data subject the possibility, if someone does something with their personal data, to go after them.
There is something to be noted with the miners. Most of the time for protocol like Bitcoin protocol, they are pulling together, so they speak as one. And so these pools is something that would not be enforced in the next version of Ethereum, for example, because if one miner behaves bad, then the whole it could be a delegated proof of stake mechanism, so everybody would be impacted within the pool for the bad behavior of one actor. So people won't pool again for the next version of.
Yeah, this would be a way how to kind of find entities that you can somehow relate to. This would be something in the this arrangement between the joint controllers that you could really implement.
Put skin in the game because they put the stake, so they can lose their stake.
It makes it much easier if you work with stake, because you could somehow connect the legal obligation to stake and then somehow distribute it. So it makes it a bit easier. And one interesting thing that has not been in the debate yet is there's actually the possibility for member states to make specified laws. Because we always say, okay, now we have the GDPR, so the member states cannot make their own laws. But we have an opening clause in Article 26, Section 1, Sentence 2, and we can distribute the responsibilities of joint controllers through national law in certain scenarios. So I would say Germany, for example, could make their own blockchain law. Based on this, they could make a specialized blockchain law on how the responsibilities of different joint controllers has to be distributed in a blockchain scenario. And I think this shows also like the GDPR is a very abstract legal framework, but it can be specified if you know the details. So over this opening clause, also the European Union could make a special law which is applicable to blockchain scenarios to say how do we distribute correctly the responsibilities of joint controllers. And this would also really reduce the legal uncertainty, because you would have a law which says, okay, if you use blockchain in this proof of stake, it's the stakeholders who are responsible, or so on. Okay. Also, I just wanted to show there's different opinions. If blockchain scenarios are joint controller, so even this is not sure. Some people say no. They say because which rules apply does not result from an agreement of the nodes, but ultimately just the sum of their independent behavior. So they say there is no joint acting between them because they all act individual, so it cannot be joint controllers. Some people say maybe, so they say it depends. And actually what we say in our paper is to say yes. We say blockchain networks should be considered a subset of joint controllership, with the result that a transparent agreement about the responsibilities becomes the prerequisite for a compliant application. Here's the thing to the tech community: how can we make this arrangement inside the network? And blockchain developers would therefore be forced to consider the liability side of data protection already in the design stage, another layer on top of the other privacy questions. So this is something for legal informatics in the future, to really think how can we distribute the responsibilities correct and how can we distribute in the thing. Then the kind of end boss always of lawyers is the right to be forgotten. Article 70 GDPR, so we can always say, okay, blockchains are immutable, so you cannot delete anything without it becoming unfunctional. So this is how it starts. And then you look deeper into it. And I think you know what does it actually mean. It just says it says nothing about forget, it says about erase. Here again, without undue delay, try to put this into code. Hard. And if, like the cases are, if it's no longer necessary to use the data, again, when is it not necessary? This again needs interpretation of someone. So it's really hard to make that into code. Or if someone withdraws consent, you have to delete it. or it has been unlawfully processed. So if you don't have the copyright, if it's like some private, naked picture of someone, this is all would be unlawfully processed. Also, then you have to erase. And that makes it kind of hard. And then it makes it even more difficult is that you have to say, according to section 2, you have to also inform controllers which are processing the personal data that the data subject has requested the erasure. So not only you have to erase it yourself, but you have to tell everyone who's got the data from you that they also should erase. So in this case, you're asking, how does it work with, in a Bitcoin scenario? There is no layer that you can communicate to all nodes, but it would be possible to say there should be a layer that if there's an erasure request, that somehow all the nodes agree on erasing and then it's gone. That's just theoretically, I don't know how to do it technically, but this would be a possibility, but still now it doesn't work. In many blockchain scenarios, you need somehow this information to all that there's a deletion request and somehow find a technical parallel to that. What does it even mean? What's erasing? Back in the days, it's just paper file, you just throw away the paper file. The one paper, rip it out and throw it away, and it's erased because it doesn't exist. But what does it mean in digital systems? Is it this? Is it somehow just deleting it, putting it to your trash bin? This is an example. The ex-wife of the German president. When you looked for her name, there came prostitute, escort, about her because there was some rumor. Is this deleting to get out of the index of Google? And interestingly, this is the German land registry. So even if you have something deleted in the land registry, which is a book, you just strike it through. It doesn't get ripped out. It's actually stricken through. So we see deleting doesn't mean to destroy it forever and ever and ever, and nobody can recover it. It just basically means kind of make it in a way that most people cannot access it. So we have to define this term also erasing in a new way through dialogue between our two disciplines. This is the pruning mechanism, even from the Satoshi original white paper. So also Oliver mentioned that, so there is a way to save space. He calls it Satoshi Nakamoto or whoever that is, said, okay, to save space we can delete some leaves of the Merkle tree, but maybe we can make this happening also for deleting. But it's then again, I think, a question of architecture. And so there is ways. Also, we could say zero knowledge proofs, maybe we can use for that. There's Accenture like this chameleon hash to somehow in permission scenarios erase. And my colleagues, Professor Mario Martini and Julian Weinzel, have also written an article about that in a legal journal. How can you actually erase data? And I think it's a possibility, you can do that, but you have to, again, consider both disciplines. How's the time actually?
Take your time.
Okay. So now we have all the kind of, the most hot topics in legal scholarship about data protection and blockchain. So it's data controllership, the personal data, and right to be forgotten. So that's some of the main things. And then now we have privacy by design. So privacy by design is actually not a legal concept by nature, but it's now in Article 25 GDPR, and it's more like an idea that also we follow in our research, is to say, okay, why don't we consider privacy from scratch? And again, to show you the law, I know it's maybe boring, but it's just nice to see, that there is a law that you can actually take and read stuff inside, and maybe it helps you. So you have to take into account, and again, some ambiguous terms: state of the art, cost of implementation, nature, scope, context, purpose of processing, as well as the risks and severity for our rights and freedoms of natural persons. You take all of this into account, make this big equation. And then you should implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to reduce these risks, basically. So it's always the question, okay, how can I make my architecture in a way that privacy is fulfilled in the best way, let's say. And you have to integrate this necessary safeguards into the processing itself. So that's privacy by design. It's in the law, so it's not just an idea, and it's an obligation to all data controllers to follow that. And interestingly, here the section 3 says approved certification mechanisms can be used to demonstrate compliance. And these certification mechanisms, we'll also talk at the end, is basically like a standard. You take a certificate and say, okay, if you have all the funds in the certificate and you get the certificate, then you might be compliant with the GDPR. And we can make use of this for blockchain scenarios. So this would be one other regulatory thing that I would suggest is make a certification mechanism for blockchain technology, because then the legal uncertainty will be higher, and then maybe there will be more blockchain scenarios on the market, because they would see, okay, if you go for this certification, then you're kind of safe. Just to make it a bit more clear, is how we do it today. Is we build architecture, programming, data sources, put into code, and then this boring lawyer comes and say all of this is wrong, or all of this is good, and then you have legal compliance, or you get lawyered. Say, this is very frustrating. I think this process, if you come up with all these things, and at the end some lawyer comes and tells you it's not possible, but you don't even understand why, then you have to do it all over again. So privacy by design would be rather like this. That's the next one. So this is, okay, why do we need privacy by design? Back in the days it was more, okay, solve a problem in a fast way. This, the programmer's duty, and the lawyer has to see, okay, do we protect natural persons, and is there any conflict with the law? This was two separate things, and what we're trying is to bridge this gap and bring, like, have programmers who understand the legal part and have lawyers who understand the technical part, because then they can really work much closer, because the lawyers can explain it in a way that the programmers understand, and the programmers have already an awareness about how they should make their architecture, and that they have to consider privacy. So now it's separate, and privacy by design would mean we have this all in the beginning. The lawyer even and the programmer sit in the beginning, make a plan, and then they program, and then in the best case it's legally compliant by design. This saves a lot of energy, brings a lot of cooperation between different disciplines, and also saves resources in the best case. So that's privacy by design, and we try to apply it to blockchain. Yeah, that's already it from my side. Can maybe ask some questions, or otherwise I give over to Chris, who will then start with the technical perspective of the scenarios. Any questions?
I would just like to add, in your last slide about privacy by design and the lawyers and all of that, I just wanted to mention, like, in the world of security, they've been doing this for forever. So there's a lot of good resources and frameworks that already come out of the security space. So for future reference and research, because that's security products are all built in privacy by design as principles. So if anyone wants to look more into that, I think there's a lot of good resources and frameworks from the security side of things.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it's kind of oversimplified, but
yeah, for sure.
Just to get the idea somehow.
There is a question from the stream from Kolain. Do you have an answer to the question if the hash of personalized data is furthermore personalized data? Of course, one answer is that the efforts to try out all the input facilities for the hash function is directly dependent to the complexity of the input data. But if the input data is complex enough to assure that trying out all the different possibilities would need thousands of years, would that be secure enough to be considered certain in the sense of GDPR?
Yeah, so the answer to, what's the name of Nico? Nico, yes. Maybe you haven't heard, I'm trying to answer your question. Yes, if in a case where it would be unproportionately high to identify a person behind the data, so it would take 1,000 years for the person, it would be considered not personal, but you could not generally say that a hash is, I would say, per se not personal data, because a hash also can be seen in context. So you have always the same hash in different scenarios, different use cases. You can somehow identify it to an IP address or like a phone ID or whatever. Then you can have personal data. But if you separately only look at one hash and the original data, then you could say, okay, the hash is anonymous. But then it depends on the context and the architecture and how the data is connected. Separately seen, yes, the hash is anonymous, I would say, but yeah, not in any case. You cannot just say, oh, I hash and then it's not personal data. That would be too simplistic. Okay, then we make the transition.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Very, very interesting. I'll now continue. Okay, so I'll do the second half of this paper now. So we've already seen that Mike explained to you a bit where all the legal work and our legal thoughts and also like our vision of the whole of a good solution to those problems originate in the space of law. And I just want to say that I am a computer scientist, so I come out of the field, and at some point I really felt a bit like that computer scientists, even though we're like, especially probably because this is also quite young science, that our community kind of tends to build solutions to certain problems like in their own bubble. So we think, okay, we have everything well defined, so basically we have all the facts that we need to know in order to solve a problem. But when you then look onto the daily problems that we have with computer systems, when we give them to how we like to call them noobs, and they're trying to use those systems, often they don't really understand what developers want them to do, because the developer says like, yeah, well, it's obvious, you click here and then there and then there, and this is your well-defined process, and then you get to the end. But sometimes people use software in a way how it's not intended, and then suddenly things happen that we didn't think about. And then I talked to Mike about those problems, and then I suddenly realized that actually law is dealing with very, very similar issues that that life just throws problems at them, and they're trying to come up with generic rule sets, but then suddenly the rule sets don't provide them with answers to the problem they have to solve. And so this is really why I thought, okay, I want to ask him, how can we somehow derive some definition from the law to good solutions that we can then basically create design patterns or other things that computer scientists know how to work with, and give them good guidelines how to design systems. And this is what we did for privacy by design in a blockchain scenario. And so basically from everything that he explained to you in the beginning, I want to show you how I came up and basically through this. We already said that with the common language between law and computer science. We took basically the example of managing consent and protecting the data subject's right to information, access, and objection when personal data is processed. So this is maybe not rocket science, especially not for the techies of you, but I still want to get into a bit more detail for all the non-techies. So we came up with a concept in our paper which we call architectural blueprint. So the idea here is to take the basic concept of a design pattern, which which have computer scientists, where we say, okay, for example, we have the server-client architecture. It's good because we have many clients, and the clients can connect to the server, and it's very useful if we have some interlaid information in a data silo somewhere, which is centralized and accessible, and clients can just access it and then grab the data and do something on the browser. So that's what this design pattern is used for. And I tried to come up with a design pattern for this legal problem that I just described. So the managing consent and all that other stuff that relates with it. And the first thing I did is I distributed the problem that we have into 3 zones, let's say. So one zone is going to be an issuing party, because when we have some kind of data exchange, an entity might want to have some verification that data is trustworthy. This is because I assume that to have true self-sovereignty, the whole power and the whole control over the data should be as close as possible with the data subject. But we might also have a data controller in the scenario anyways, because if we have non-technical guys, they might not be able to host this infrastructure themselves, so we can't expect from every person that he has an own node running, which he manages himself and is like has the knowledge to implement with security and stuff. So basically, what we are suggesting is that we have something like a smart contract running in the space, or in the space of the data subject. So we're talking about control over the data that is running through the smart contract here. And the smart contract is, for one, managing some type of personal data, which is encrypted and has been issued by an issuing party. And we're going to have a consent that has to be requested by a controller. So the use case that we have is this controller wants to get access to some type of personal data that has been issued by another party. And so in order for the data subject to need full control, we say, okay, we assume that this is a use case where the data subject has to give consent. So the controller requests this consent, which is handled by the smart contract. And then, let's say, of course, the data subject can refuse the consent, and then the use case ends, because nothing is done any further. But to get this going further, the data subject grants the consent. And then the controller can request the personal data through the smart contract. So the smart contract can check, okay, the data subject has given consent for this controller to use that type of personal data. And then the data subject gets notified about the request, and that the smart contract gave access to this personal data to the controller. So then the controller is now wondering, okay, but is it actually true what the data subject told me? Because the controller is getting the data from the smart contract that is run by the data subject, so there could be a potential risk that the data subject is tampering with the data in the smart contract. So the controller can, through a hash, for example, check the validity of the data. So the next step is, if the data subject now decides, I don't like this company anymore, or there have been news that they are using the data in a way they're not supposed to, he can revoke his consent, and then the smart contract would always know that he has to deny requests to access to this personal data. So the first impression of this is, I showed this to other colleagues of mine, and this was like the first criticism. I mean, this is, like I said, really no rocket science. This is technology that we have available, I don't know, since a very long time. I mean, if I asked you, like, do you think that this this is a brilliant new idea. I think all of you would argue, actually not. Like, this is how we have done things for quite a while now, except for that we put the box of where the data is hosted down to the controller, because in the middle it's not practical, right? That's the long story short. So that's the thing why this is just an architectural blueprint. So this is not how, this is not because I want to tell you this is how you can design good IT systems. This is just the minimal solution if you want to design an IT system that basically has the highest standard, has the legal requirements, so which is basically the data protection with the data subject's interests in mind. And so from there on, this is, I'm just going to skip that. So this was a little overview what issues or what requirements we actually addressed. And then the question is really, what does this have to do with blockchain? So the thing is, what's really new and the opportunity that blockchain can give us here, it allows us to actually realize this architectural blueprint by saying, okay, we could have another type of controller, which is not trying to access the data, but who's providing the service to host the data on a provided node if they don't want to host the data themselves, because then you have to think about problems like high availability, because obviously if we want the controller to always request the personal data whenever he processes it, which gives the controller the advantage of always having up-to-date data, this needs to be highly available. So we can actually share this space here and say the data subject can access a blockchain where he can revoke and grant consent, and the blockchain always notifies him whenever data is accessed through this smart contract. Oh, and this is just a very simple example of a methodology that we basically propose how we can translate legal requirements into basically the same requirements, but on a technical level where computer scientists can work with this without having to study law for 1 or 2 years in order to understand the legal texts and make all this mental work for themselves. So first, are there any questions about this in particular, or just the concept of architectural blueprints and what they could bring us? No? I hope that's a good thing. So then I just want to also talk about further challenges about consent that we identified in the paper. So one thing is definitely clear and plain language, because in our history, when we've been working for 3 years now together, is that one of our major obstacles were that we had to explain each other what we have been talking about. So you already explained this a little, so I won't go into detail there as well. Another interesting thing is the prohibition of coupling and tying arrangements, where at least in my opinion, this isn't addressed at the moment at all. So I think it's the law that's in effect at the moment, but I don't see any option for me to use Google services without giving them all my personal data. So in a way, I feel violated in this particular right of mine. So this is also something where I hope that we're can do some work on in the future. This is kind of tied together with that one, so that with no freely given consent, if there is an imbalance between the data subject and the controller. So for example, if you say, okay, the only option that I have is really to use Google, because if I want a free management software that is interconnected and that I can use with my colleagues, I basically have to use Google because all the other stuff is either too expensive or I can't use it. And this is obviously not a legally sound argument, but that's why I'm not a lawyer.
Try employees
Mm-hmm.
and employers.
Yeah.
When an employer wants a consent from an employee within a working contract,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are you going to do as an employee? You say no, but you should the right. You have the right to say no.
Yeah.
So this is actually a constant problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also to address one thing is like the consent of children, or respectively their parents. So at the moment we have, are you over 18? Yes, I'm over 18. Cool.
Actually,
Problem solved.
most of the checkboxes ask for 16 because they're on the internet. But yeah,
It varies from country to country.
at least 6. I mean,
Mm.
yeah.
Overall,
But,
in EU,
yeah, I know, but it's the thing is not 18. 16 if it's regarded to some
Yeah.
web-based
Mhm.
internet thing.
Oh.
Can be 13 or 13 to 16. Yeah.
Okay, then let's call it the HX.
Yeah, but the point is, if you are under 18 for the GDPR, you are a child.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely nonsense, actually, because in all the EU countries, you are no child like with 14 in most countries, or sometimes even 12. Which GDPR is like, no, you're 17, child.
Ah, okay. Didn't know that. Okay, I'll continue. So, finding the common language for the third time. So what is this all about? I actually already said that. So I'll just read it out. So simple blueprints to illustrate a formally ideal solution in a legal sense. We also want blueprints that reflect the legal requirements as technical design. Simple architectural blueprints that the average developer can work with. And the blueprints should act as a suggestion. It might not be production ready. And yeah, extending the legal freebar by technical specifications. So then we also identified some research questions that we think it's very important that the whole sphere between computer science and legal works upon, and this is to close the gap between computer science and law, because to the biggest extent, both of them are still working in their own problem. Let's say like, okay, we just define something and then the other ones deal with whatever they have to deal with. We should also clarify legal requirements regarding GDPR to a tech audience. And we should also update the law to cope with blockchain technology, which was Mike giving one example about this potential opportunity of making a national law to specify blockchain as a case of joint controller. So one example for this is like, for identity, for example, the technical approach was accounts. The legal approach is just, okay, we have a natural person or a legal person, and the suggestion is really something that we have seen tomorrow by Newport with the decentralized ID. This could be a potential solution. I mean, I don't really know how far this has thought into the legal sphere already, because I don't know it in detail. This would be interesting to know. Then, of course, legal certainty and stuff. Clarify the legal requirements regarding the GDPR to a tech audience is, like I already said, the blueprint approach. We could also add some compliance checklists. So there is a lot of work to be done here. And there are several questions how we could update the law to cope with blockchain technology. So start modeling certification processes, solving how do we solve the right to erasure with blockchain technology. So what are our possibilities there? How can those certification processes once they're in place, be used to implement compliant blockchains into the market? How does a code-based governance differ from the traditional forms of bureaucracy? So I think this is a very, very interesting question to throw back at the whole crypto community. Like, in what way, when you look at it effectively from a real-world implication, how is code different from today's bureaucracy? Like, once you really live in the code world and say, like, okay, this is going to happen, code is nothing else than bureaucracy. It allows you to choose between some options, and in some way it's even worse than today's bureaucracy, because there are no alternatives. If you don't implement an alternative decision that a user can make into your code, you're being even more a fascist than today's bureaucracy, because I live in the free world and I can just decide to say, no, I'm not going to take A or B, I'm just going to go around the corner and take option C. But there is no going around the corner in code. And so this is this is really something to think about.
Say it in German.
Philosophy. I mean, stuck with something very simple. So from a philosophical sense, this is very, very interesting to talk about, because like I went through this tendency as well, that we think, okay, everything is well defined and we can think about everything, we can give people more freedom, but we could also take some freedom away if we not think about what we're doing very carefully. Then how can blockchains establish a democratic and human-centered mode of governance? And with those, I really want to get to the end of my talk and want to invite you to become pioneers in privacy by blockchain design. So thank you very much, and please applause for Michael as well, because we missed out on that one. Thank you. Questions? If there are no questions, I would like you to take a break. And when are we going to continue again?
Nico B asks, did you two, Michael and Christian, not only develop this architectural grouping, but do you have also practical experience with it? If the latter is true, are there projects one can do that?
Short answer, no, we don't have any practical experience with it. This is what we're trying to start and kick off at the moment, because we are slowly crawling out of our secure research space and trying to get our hands dirty with real-world problems. Because, like I said, once your problems are not well defined anymore, things start to get a bit more complicated. And I think now we are ready and also have the required background and knowledge, and also partners to help us with this, to get our hands dirty.
This could be interesting to see from the data subjects, their responsibility, and they seem to have quite a lot of activity on their end. So this would, and responsibility as well, of course. So that could be interesting to see how that plays out in real world scenarios. Different users in different parts of the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were also really looking forward to apply this to.
Yeah, because usability is obviously will help with the adoption.
Yes.
About the second point about the consent question with the blockchain, I don't see to be better, because each transaction needs to be signed digitally. So, for example, if we use the hard wallets, we must really read on the device to make sure that the transaction is exactly the same. So there is a second factor of authentication at the same time, and we have to prove prove ownership of the private key we are signing from?
I think there's like this is really a hurdle that we're seeing again, because you kind of start translating the legal point of view that I just used on this problem. You try to translate it very simplified on a technical level, and then when you look at this on a technical level, of course everything is fine, because you say, okay, if I have it signed with a private key, then everything is fine. But in a legal sense, you can upload a nude picture of me with your private key onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and then I would argue, no, this is not legally sound, because
so but just from one side, proving ownership of my voice, it's voting.
Yeah, but the thing is, you could claim ownership of something where, in fact, I have the ownership, but the IT system thinks that you are the owner because you use your private key to sign something. So this is really the kind of angles that we have to look at, and these are exactly the kind of problems where we need to stick our heads together and have to do some interdisciplinary work to figure all that stuff out and to come to good solutions that will work in a broad application, where we also have non-understanding users who say, like, why did this happen? I thought the system was secure. And then you can't argue, yeah, well, technically it's secure. So it's not good enough.
Yeah, it's more like it's like a psychological concept. You know, someone says, yes, I want like meeting of the minds, which you describe as like a technical concept. But that's why also what we said is it needs to be free consent, so you cannot, if someone sits next to you with a gun to your head and says you give your consent, technically it's legally it's not a consent, because you were forced to do it. So this is like, that's why we have this more broad view, which is like more psychological consent.
And also therefore, thank you, very, very good question.
But I think it's more like a more digital inherent problem. If I am the first one to upload something on YouTube, then I will get the reward of all the views being made.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, any further questions to the audience, to the physical or virtual audience? No, then let's get a break. I think we deserve that one.